Welcome back to episode 57 of the P.S. Gilmore story, and continuing with the Grand Army of the Republic, and this is the GAR, and it's part 3 of that story. Here's a picture of the Grand Review that took place in 1865 in Washington, D.C. over 2 days, when over 1 million men marched through Washington with either General Custer or Tecumseh Sherman at their head. And they were reviewed there by the incoming President Johnson and General Ulysses S. Grant. Here's an idea of these GAR posts and the numbers that they... And you see at the bottom there totals 4,200 posts, and the figures are going up at this stage because obviously the volunteers by and large are still alive, and of course there comes a time when the volunteers died off, and I think the last volunteer would have died in some time around 1950. I might be wrong on that. Please correct me if I am. P.S. Gilmore basically decided, as part of the reconstruction project, that he would develop an idea. It was going to be called the National Peace Jubilee. It was to bring people together in reconciliation and harmony, and it was going to take place in Boston over 5 days. And during those 5 days, music would be played, and there would be visitors from north, south, east, and west. Here's a picture of Gilmore himself at that event, and this was very much part of what Gilmore figured was part of the reconstruction of America, but the reconstruction of American minds. Here's Gilmore's good friend, President Ulysses S. Grant, a man with a dreadfully difficult job after the war because America as such had very little money. It's very hard to do anything without money in the bank. Here is a certificate that was basically given, recognition that was given by the governor of Massachusetts to Gilmore for his patriotism to not only the 24th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, under with whom he served in the Carolinas, but also for his work throughout the war. And that was the complete war, where he trained, at least on my research, somewhere in the region of 10 different regimental bands. It was a great piece of recognition, and in fact the only recognition that Gilmore got in his life for his service. But he would have done it anyway because he wanted to repay his adopted home. Here's the badge of the National War Musicians, from which obviously the previous badge was drawn. And as a result of all of that, and Gilmore would have attended GAR events throughout America, particularly in St. Louis and Chicago and so on, and inauguration of statues, he decided he was going to form a specific musician's post, number 452, which later on would be called P.S. Gilmore Post. And you'll hear the story about that in the next episode. It says here, the Musician's Post 452 New York is made up of bandsmen who served during the war. It was organized by P.S. Gilmore, who was its first commanding officer. And why is this unusual? Because most GAR posts would have been drawn from specific regiments, from a specific posting, from a specific fort or a specific ship or whatever. But in this case, the intent was you would only be allowed to join this post if you had fought as a bandsman, as a musician, within in the Civil War. Here's the muster-in sheet, for instance, and and all the details that were required specifically for the post 452 registration, I suppose. And you'll see now in a second, here's P.S. Gilmore, the very first entrant. And he's 54 years old at time of mustering or enter into the post. And he is a musician, serves with the 24th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment as a bandsman. And it gives all of these details. You see some more on the second page, where they, and again, bear in mind, this is in a long, long time before computers and so on and so forth. So they're doing well with their details. And in Gilmore's case, it says here that he was mustered in on March the 13th, 1884 into the GAR 452. So that's the foundation date of this post. And he died in September the 24th, according to this, 1892. Now that also could have been when the news reached the GAR itself. It's not. I've seen a few cases where it doesn't always tie up exactly with the date of death. Gilmore laid to rest, and you'll see what happens now with this. When he was laid to rest, obviously it was a huge funeral. Up to some of the estimates are that 500,000 people were on the sidewalks in New York. Halfway down this particular article, about 50 members of musical post 452 GAR were present, and a delegation of these bore the casket containing the body of their dead comrade from the train to the hearse. Now, that's not to say that only 50 members of GAR were in mourning for Gilmore. In fact, most members of the GAR would have known about Gilmore's military service because it was well publicized, and his music was even better known. But they wouldn't have obviously all have been a member of this post, not having been musicians themselves. And here from the Library of Congress is a photograph that I'm reliably informed. It looks very similar to the to the St. Francis Xavier's Church in Manhattan, and it shows a coffin been borne from the horse-drawn hearse in front into the church itself to be received by the priests on duty there. A very large funeral, and this indeed is P.S. Gilmore's funeral. 8,000 ladies stood outside in absolute anguish over the passing of Gilmore, and it had an amazing effect. Even the then president literally was in mourning over his passing. So listen, I thank you very much for listening to this tonight, and we'll be back next week with the final episode of the GAR and Gilmore's post, GAR post 452. So please click subscribe and like, and I thank you for your time. Good night. Bye-bye.